Now a pivot chart is nothing more than an interactive chart, and it's all based upon a pivot table. If you don't have a pivot table, you can't create a pivot chart. So for example, if I want to go ahead and turn this into a pivot chart, go ahead and click anywhere within the database here, and let me scroll down to show you how big my database is. Not very big. Scroll back up, and then come up here and click on the Insert tab, go to the Tables group and click on the drop down arrow, and let's create a pivot chart. It's going to ask me to verify again that the data here selected is what I want to see in my pivot chart. And I also want it on a new worksheet. If it's not selected correctly, then I can click the Collapse dialog box button, click and drag to select it, but I'm okay with it, so I'll expand it. Go ahead and click OK. Now in the previous training video, when you created the pivot table, it had the pivot table here and the field list. In addition to what we see here when we create a pivot chart, it adds the chart in the middle of our screen here. Of course it's blank because we haven't built upon it yet, meaning that you have to create a pivot table, you have to have data that you can pivot in and out of before you can actually create a chart, because a chart is going to be based upon your pivot table, and your pivot table is going to be based upon your database here. So you could ask me and say, well, in the previous training video we created the pivot table. What if we created one and then later decide we wanted to also have a pivot chart? Well, that's not too difficult to do. Go ahead and let me click on the Office logo button and bring up that previous exercise, Create Pivot Tables. There's the database. Over on sheet 6 we have the pivot table. Click anywhere within the pivot table, and then come up here and click on the Options tab. In the Tools group, there's your pivot chart. Click on that. Go ahead and choose the chart you want. Double click on it, and boom, it automatically puts it in there. There's my fiction, fantasy, self-help, my groups by books, MP3s. So whatever I filter out in my pivot table is going to update and reflect in my pivot chart. Let me go ahead and close out of here. I'm not going to save it. Let's just go ahead and create a pivot chart here. And let's go from our database here back to our Sheet 2 tab here where we have our pivot table chart yet to be seen, and then over here the list. I'm going to go ahead and close out of the pivot chart filter pane. And if I want to bring it up, notice up here we have 4 contextual tabs instead of 3. The Analyze tab. If I close out of here, it removes the pivot chart filter. I can click on it to bring it back up or click on it to remove it. I don't need it for now. Now, you could come up here and start checking off boxes like saying, well, I'd like to see my year. If I click on year, it automatically adds it down as a value. Well, if I go to my database here, the year does have numerical values, but when I go back to my pivot table pivot chart, I don't want it to be as part of the values. I actually want it to be a legend. So instead of checking it and adding it down there, I'm going to actually uncheck it and then click and drag it and say you're the legend. In other words, I have my year 2004, 2005. Next, I want to be able to add my months. So I'm going to click and drag it and add it down to my axis fields, or my horizontal here in my chart. Those are the axis fields. So I have my January, February, March, and then my value Y field here, my vertical axis, just gives me some generic number until I actually have more data I can contribute to my pivot table that will reflect and show and update correctly in my pivot chart. And those fields are going to be referring to values or numbers. So what numbers do I want to be able to show up in my chart here? Is it going to be sold or income? Again, the foundation that I want to emphasize is know your database. Because based upon what I have in my database is what I want to see in my pivot chart. For example, if I go back to my database, I have all the items sold. Do I want to see a chart on what we sold or how much we've made? Or the income that we brought in? Well, maybe income. So I'll go back to my Sheet 2 tab. I'll come here and click and drag income down to the values, and there we go. Let me go ahead and scroll over just a bit, and there's the legend 2005, 2004, the income that we made in 2004 for October, November, December. Wasn't too bad. It was pretty low in November here, so you get the idea. In other words, what I see over here in my pivot table is what I get over here in my pivot chart. I can also do a report filter by product, so if I click and drag my product down to the report filter, then I can click on the drop down arrow for my products and say, look, I just want to see for Double Bubble, and then click OK. Well, for Double Bubble in January of 2005, sales were just below the mark, and then we went up in February. And then for October, wow, it really shot up for Halloween, and then it drifted off. So basically, if you know how to create a pivot table, the chart will come naturally there because it will update. Now if I want to make changes to my chart, like let's say I want to format it, go ahead and click on the chart to be sure that you have it selected so you can get the contextual related tabs up at the top. I'm going to click on the Design tab, come over here to the Type group, and click on Change Chart Type. Let's do something crazy here. How about if we do a stacked cylinder? Double click on that, it updates, and I've got it for January, February, and then March. Of course, I can come up here and change the chart styles as well by clicking on it, and that looks good. Basically, it's the same type of thing when it comes to watching the training video on manipulating your charts. You can change the styles, you can change the chart type, the layouts here where you want your legend to be, if it's over to the right or at the bottom you can see here, or at the top. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as soon as I upload a new video, you'll be notified instantly, and you can do that by coming over here and clicking on my face. You can also click here to support me, so for $2 a month, you can have access to over 2,700 training videos, all ad-free, and for a few bucks more, you can have access to my exercises, instructor notes, quizzes, certificate of completion, and a whole lot more.